Hey, good morning, Trondheim friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Patio, Ponderings, and happy Easter. Jesus is risen. He is risen indeed. Sunday was just wonderful here. So last week in our Patio Ponderings, we reflected back on the story we heard with the unnamed woman that meets Jesus just before his crucifixion and pours oil, perfumed oil, very expensive oil over his head. And we talked about how that was a preparation for burial, and it was also anointing Jesus as Messiah. But we also pondered forward. We anticipated how different women would appear in the stories that we hear during Holy Week. The crucifixion story and the resurrection story. And so I wanted to circle back to that. Now that we've walked through those stories and have had a chance to reflect on them and worship in dwelling in those stories, I wanted to circle back. And so let's remind ourselves where the women have showed up in these stories. On Good Friday in Mark chapter 15, verse 40, it says, "Some women were watching from a distance, including Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joses, and Salome. When Jesus was in Galilee, these women had followed and supported him, along with many other women who had come to Jerusalem with him." So this is a group of women that are present as Jesus is being crucified and when he is taking his final breaths. And just a quick note, we're focusing on Mark. Those are the stories where we've heard our stories from. But all four of the Gospels have women present in these final stories and in the resurrection. There are some different circumstances talked about. There's some different details talked about. We hear more about the other disciples in the other Gospels. In Mark's Gospel, there are no disciples present at the crucifixion or the resurrection. Just that note. So those are the women that are present at the crucifixion. And then in verse 47, just a few verses later, we hear that Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joses, saw where Jesus was buried. So they were present at the burial as well. And finally, our Easter story, the resurrection story in Mark 16, we hear that when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they could go and anoint Jesus' body. And so it is the women that are there at the crucifixion. They are there to see Jesus buried. They are there at the resurrection. And the other thing that is consistent in the Gospels is, along with their presence on Easter morning, there is a commission or a command, a call from whether it's one angel or two angels, however the Gospel tells the story, that now they are to go and tell. So these women have the task to preach or proclaim the good news of the resurrected Christ. And so I've been continuing to reflect on this. It seems that in this core story of our faith, this is the foundation of the Christian faith. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is what our faith is built on. And this group of women have such a strong presence in these stories and an important role in all of these stories. And yet, as a church, over time and in different ways in different places, we have, to one extent or another, limit the roles of women in the church. And I just find that so fascinating, that we can overlook at this key juncture in our faith stories the strong presence and role that women have. And so I'm wondering, have you been thinking about this? have you been thinking about how women show up in this story? Have you been thinking about their role and what they're being asked to do? And what do you wonder then about how, as the church has grown over time and space, how women's roles have or have not been established and honored or dishonored? Just wondering what you're thinking about that. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And it's going to be interesting to continue now as we go forward in the story. We're going to spend a few weeks in Acts and looking at the early church. And my suspicion is, well, it's not my suspicion, I know that in these stories the women are going to continue to show up. So I invite you to continue to pay attention and to continue to reflect on this and to think about the role of women in our important stories of faith and how those roles have and have not changed and evolved over time. Well, it's good to be with you. I hope you all had a wonderful Easter, and I hope to see you all on Sunday. Bye.